Hello and welcome to Nikolay's genetics lessons, and today's problem is consider trihybrid cross of heterozygous parents such as, and here is a genotype of parent 1 and also the same genotype for parent 2. What is the probability for the progeny of being phenotypically dominant for all three traits? And as usual, I recommend you to pause video here, try to solve this problem on your own first, and when you would be ready, you can run video again and you can compare your answer with my answer and explanation. So, first of all, what is a trihybrid cross? And if we talking about simple Mendelian genetics, diploid organism for the gene, say, A, may have two alleles. One would be dominant, that we designate with capital A, and another can be recessive allele A, that we designate with lowercase a. And these two alleles may produce in diploid organism following combinations. So it can be homozygous dominant, it can be heterozygous, one dominant and one recessive allele, and it can be homozygous recessive. So we call this combination in the middle heterozygous or hybrid. And word trihybrid means that organism is heterozygous for three genes. If we are saying that we have a monohybrid cross, we mean that we cross two parents that is going to be heterozygous for one gene. But in our example, we have two parents that is heterozygous for three genes. So how we are going to find a probability that a progeny would be phenotypically dominant for all three traits? And if this example represents simple Mendelian genetics, that means that each gene would be inherited separately from the rest. That means that each gene would be on the different chromosome. And in this case, we just can split this problem to smaller and easier to solve problem. For example, for the gene D, as you see, parent 1 is heterozygous and parent 2 also heterozygous. So let's build a Punnett square for this gene, capital D, small d, parent 1, and capital D, small d, parent 2. And when we build a Punnett square, we can see frequency of the different genotypes and phenotypes in the progeny. Capital D here, and capital D, small d here, capital D, small d here, and small d here. So, once again, I want you to pay attention that the question about phenotype, dominant phenotype. So, out of this 4, dominant phenotype would be represented by these 3 genotypes. So, if we would have a monohybrid cross, like in this example, or we can put capital D small d, capital D small d here, we may say that probability that in monohybrid cross 3/4 would be dominant phenotype and 1/4 would be recessive phenotype. So, but when in example with 3 genes, we can do the same thing for each gene, because each gene would be each allele would be inherited independently from the rest genes and alleles. So for example, we would see the same picture for the gene R. So both parent 1 and parent 2 are heterozygous. So dominant phenotype, imagine that here is a capital R and small r here, capital R and small r here. So we would see the same frequency for the dominant phenotype for the gene R. So probability for the dominant phenotype for the gene D, in other words, in progeny we can put capital D and blank space, because where the second allele can be also dominant allele or can be recessive allele. So probability of such an event would be 3 out of 4. And probability that second gene R in the progeny also would produce dominant phenotype also would be 3/4 probability. And as you see, the same rules and principles apply to the gene Q, and probability that we would have this phenotype in the progeny for the gene Q also would be 3/4, because each allele would be independently inherited and would be independently segregated from the rest of the alleles. We can use a product rule and multiply each individual probability, and as you see, the answer would be 27 out of 64. So total number of combinations in trihybrid cross would be 64. How do I know it? Take a look here. So this parent may give to the progeny with the dominant allele D or recessive allele D. So two variants here, and two variants here. Parent 2 also may give with the dominant allele D or recessive allele D, with the dominant allele R or recessive allele R, dominant allele Q or recessive allele Q. So as you see, each parent may give two variants for each gene. So 2 multiplied by 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 and by 2 would be 64 combinations. So total number of combinations would be 64, and 27 of these combinations would produce dominant phenotype for each trait. And one more example: what is the probability that progeny would show recessive trait for all 3 genes? And the answer would be 1/4 probability that progeny would show homozygous recessive genotype for the gene D, the same 1/4 for gene R, and 1/4 for the gene Q in the progeny. So we have to multiply 1/4 by 1/4 and by 1/4. So probability of such genotype would be 1 out of 64. So this is going to be probability that progeny would show recessive phenotype for all 3 traits, and this is going to be a probability that a progeny would show dominant phenotype for all 3 traits. So I think that now it is clear how to solve such problems. In my previous video I use example and we have to find genotypes, and this time, as you see, we have to find phenotype. So we have one genotype here, this is second genotype, and this is third genotype. But in simple Mendelian genetics, these 2 genotypes would produce 1 phenotype. So we have 2 phenotypes and 3 genotypes. So you need to pay attention to the question, whether the question is about phenotype or genotype, because this would influence your calculations. And this is all for today. Thank you for your attention. Please subscribe for my new videos that I post almost every day. Thumbs up if you like this video. Please write your comments, questions if you have any. And see you in the next video. Goodbye.